The Batman, or the Caped Crusader / the Dark Knight, is the most popular comic book character ever, and arguably the most popular character in the history of cinema. It has had many different adaptations in live action, ranging from Christian Bale, to George Clooney, to Val Kilmer, to Michael Keaton, to Ben Affleck, and to the latest adaptation of the character in Matt Reeves' The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson. So now it is time to review it and tell you guys what I thought of the movie. Here we go. Okay, so before I start the review, there are just two things I want to say. The first thing is obviously this is a spoiler review, so if you've been around my channel long enough, you know the drill by now. If you do care about spoilers and haven't seen the movie, then go and watch it and come back, or if you have seen the movie or don't care about spoilers, then continue watching. And the second thing I want to say is just my general experience on this movie, so that you know where I'm coming from when I go into the review. So I've seen it twice by now. The first time that I watched it, I was extremely hyped going into it, but unfortunately I didn't love the movie. I knew everyone else would love it, but I was just like, yeah, it's a good movie, I like it, but I don't love it. And then I went back last night for my second viewing, and I loved it so much more. And also the first viewing experience was kind of affected by a lot of other factors too. I was really stressed in terms of school, which distracted me from enjoying it. It was pretty late, and I was pretty tired, and I was literally like half asleep for the final hour of the movie, so that definitely affected it. The popcorn was bad, and I was surrounded by annoying people. So there was a lot of factors that went into me not liking it as much as I could have in the first viewing. And also, like, I was watching all the Batman movies leading up to the Batman, so I was kind of fatigued on the Batman. Whereas I've had a long time to think about it and process, and I lowered my expectations going into it the second time, which thankfully resulted in a better outcome. And I'm definitely glad that I did rewatch it, because now I remember a lot of the stuff in the movie a lot better. And I also actually enjoyed it more, so I get to talk about the movie more positively than I would have. And a lot of the criticisms I had after the first viewing, I've kind of corrected myself since then. So yeah, without any further ado, let's just get on with this review, starting with the first section, which is the good stuff, the things that I loved about this movie. And a large portion of this video is going to be spent in this section, because I loved a lot of things about this movie. So let's get into this. Here we go. Okay, so like all my reviews, I'm going to start this section off by talking about the technical aspects of the movie that I really appreciated, and then I'll get into the more story elements of this movie. So the first thing in this category is Matt Reeves' direction. Matt Reeves is the GOAT, we all know this. I love that man so much, and he absolutely blew it out of the park with this movie. He had so many unique and creative decisions in directing this movie. Particularly, I really loved how he incorporated like a lot of first-person perspectives throughout the movie, like where the camera was placed, like in the Penguin Batman fight, like the camera was placed on the side of the car, or in the funeral scene, instead of cutting away to the car, you know, driving in straight away, we focus on Bruce a lot of the time, which I loved. And other examples include like when he's riding on the bike, you know, with the Something in the Way soundtrack, which is chef's kiss perfection. You know, we're focusing on, you know, what he sees from his perspective, and the goggles and like the eye things we'll talk about soon. All that stuff is incredibly creative, and for a director that's just starting out, I'm pretty sure they probably wouldn't have included this stuff. He definitely showed his expertise, and I feel like Matt Reeves' entire career was just building up to this incredible movie, and I really enjoyed it. And he definitely demonstrated himself to be one of the most credible directors after this movie. The second technical aspect I loved is Michael Giacchino's score. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, I'm sorry. Which I should know because I'm Italian, but anyways, his score is absolutely incredible, and it is so iconic. Ever since that first camera test was released, like early 2020 or whatever it was, and we hear the dun, 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 it has been stuck in my head ever since. And ever since that first DC Fandom teaser came out in October 2020 or August 2020, and we hear Something in the Way mixed with that theme, it is absolutely genius, and it is so iconic, and it is by far one of my favorite themes in comic book movies as of right now. And we hear it so many times throughout the movie, and it is so iconic, as well as the Ave Maria motive. This is also another reason why it was good that I rewatched it, because I didn't pick up on a lot of this the first time. Like, I knew that the Riddler sang Ave Maria in Arkham, but I didn't realize that that was basically Riddler's theme throughout the entire movie. Like, every time we hear him appear, like at the very first scene when he's spying on the mayor through the window and stuff, we hear the instrumental version of that song, and it is just genius. Michael Giacchino, you are a GOAT. All the creators associated with this movie is incredibly talented and genius, and probably one of the best in their industries. Michael has done the Spider-Man theme, he's been in every single movie franchise too, and he's doing the new Werewolf by Night Halloween thing too. Michael, you're a legend, I love you. And also Greg Fraser, his cinematography in this movie is perfection. There are also so many iconic shots. Obviously, we have to talk about the one where he's, you know, standing upside down and walking towards the penguin. That shot is amazing. It is just so visually pleasing. Like when Batman and Catwoman are, you know, on the roof and there's the sunlight and all these beautiful shots. The use of the stagecraft technology or the volume by ILM is absolutely, it is flawless. It is amazing. And the realistic settings that were created are just, there are no words to describe how beautiful this movie looked. And also majority of the cast are incredible. I probably wouldn't say any of them are my favourite adaptations of these characters, other than the Riddler, but that's only because I haven't really seen any other adaptations of the Riddler. I haven't seen the 1980s Batman movies, which is also why I can't really compare them to like Michael Keaton and George Clooney and stuff, because I haven't seen those movies yet. I will before The Flash, trust me. But in comparison to like Christian Bale's movies and Ben Affleck's movies, I probably wouldn't put any of them as my favourite. I probably still prefer Anne Hathaway over Zoe Kravitz. Even though I think Zoe Kravitz was very good in this movie, there wasn't really anything too distinct to this version. It was kind of the same themes and topics explored, and, you know, stealing from the rich because they steal from the poor, or they don't care about the poor people and stuff like that. They were all kind of the same thing, so I was never really, you know, impressed by Catwoman. The only contention is probably Robert Pattinson's Batman, although they are very different takes on the character. If you look at like Christian Bale or Ben Affleck, who's like much older, and they're also leaning into like their playboy persona, whereas this is a more sort of emo, like very different takes on the character. This is only year 2, like I can't really compare them. And also just the action and the fight scenes in this movie is incredible. They will show 2 different sides of Batman. They discuss that Batman is incredibly intellectual, which I'll discuss soon, but he's also just shown to be so physically capable too. Like you see in that scene in the Phantom trailer, like when they're in the train station and you just see him just beating the absolute shit out of that gang member. Or when you see later on in the movie, you know, there's incredible one shot of him just like beating up all those Riddler cosplayers. All these amazing shots that demonstrate Batman's incredible physical capabilities. He's just amazing. And also, despite this movie being 3 hours, it is actually quite well paced. I mean, I will say that I was bored for the final hour and the first viewing, but that's only because I was really tired, just wanted to go to sleep. But after my second viewing, I was literally, and I'm not just saying this for the sake of saying this, I genuinely was like engaged the whole movie, and I am rarely like engaged throughout the entire movie, especially if it's 3 hours. Like, I struggle to do like a 40-minute episode sometimes, let alone 3 hours, and it was only really in like the last 10 minutes when I was like, okay, let's wrap this up. That is an incredible achievement for a movie to do. And so that's just another pro about this movie. And it just has like an overall sort of grounded feeling and tone. It's very dark. A lot of people were complaining that it was like too depressing. I remember that Rotten Tomatoes review that says something like that. It's like, mate, it's Gotham. What do you expect from this movie? I don't know, like my mom, every time I say it's a dark movie, she's like, why can't movies just be fun? And I'm just like, they're different genres. You don't have to have uplifting, you know, good time in the movies. You're gonna go to a movie and enjoy like a dark sort of take on the character. So anyways, I did really like that take. It is obviously much darker than the Dark Knight trilogy, but that was also a different take on the character too. It is very realistic, and Matt Reeves takes these unrealistic elements. You know, obviously someone dressed as a bat going around fighting crime isn't something you'd see in real life. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of unrealistic, but then they, you know, apply it to how would, you know, the real world react in this situation. And they base these realistic settings around the unrealistic element, and that's how Matt Reeves described it in an interview, which is very true. Like, for example, the Batmobile, you know, in Batman vs Superman and Justice League and like Zack Snyder's Justice League and stuff, it's just like a military tank, but in this movie it's like a sports car, like a 1950s, 60s, whatever it is, sports car. And even if you read like the prequel novel and stuff, like they talk about, you know, how he's racing and stuff, and it's just like a sports car that is kind of reinvigorated to make it like a Batmobile in a way, which is awesome. And that's just like one example. The costumes too, they look like handmade, and also like the practical elements, like you could take the Batarang and like use it as a weapon, which is awesome. All that sort of stuff. It is amazing, and it feels as if Bruce has actually made these devices himself and not just gotten it from like Morgan Freeman's character, what's his name? I'm going blank. Lucius, that's it, Lucius. And you know, he's not just going to Lucius Fox at Wayne Enterprises and stuff and asking him to build all this stuff for him. You know, he's making it himself. So yeah, those are all the technical elements of the movie I want to discuss. Now let's just get on to like the story reasons, the story elements that make this movie what it is and why I believe it is just incredible. Let's do this. Okay, so the first thing I've got in here is that Gotham in and of itself is a character in this movie, and that's the same for like Smallville, my Superman and Lois review. You know, they don't feel like a lot of people complain like The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, it just feels like Chicago, whereas in Batman Begins and in this one, you actually see Gotham and you see like the corruption, you see all the, you know, I wouldn't say poor people, but like you see all the people that, you know, the civilians too, these people have a role in it too. And arguably, Gotham is just as important as Batman. If you take out Gotham in this movie, Batman wouldn't exist because there would be no crime within Gotham, and there would be no reason for Batman to exist. And especially by the end of the movie, when he realizes that Gotham needs, you know, this sort of hero, and then Selina says, you know, Gotham is like, it's beyond saving and stuff, and he realizes, no, you know, Gotham needs me. So Gotham is this centralized figure in this movie, and especially like the way in which the corruption is explored, which we'll talk about when I get to the Riddler especially. I love that aspect of this movie, and I also really liked how, you know, the detective side of Batman is explored, and everyone else is saying the same thing too. We've seen like The Dark Knight, which definitely focused, you know, a lot on, you know, like the city saving Batman, and like the 1980s were kind of like cheesy, but they were also kind of dark at the same time too, and especially like the 1960s show, which is very, very, very cheesy. And then you see like Justice League and Zack Snyder's Justice League and stuff, where Ben Affleck is like working with a team, and he's very old and like learning how to, you know, not kill people and shit. So yeah, this movie, you know, we've never seen this aspect. You know, it's supposed to be the world's greatest detective, but we've never seen that before, and it's called Detective Comics because of Batman, pretty much. And yeah, no movie has really explored that as much, you know, than this movie has. Although I will say, going into this movie, that was like probably the aspect I was looking forward to it the most. It is probably the aspect that I was disappointed by the most, mostly because it kind of just got a bit confusing at times, which I'll get to in the mixed stuff. But that's not to say that I didn't love that they were trying to do something different with this movie. A lot of people complain, you know, oh, we've seen so many Batman movies, why do we need another one and stuff? But there are still so many aspects and layers to this character and to this world we haven't explored, and this is just further proof of that. And Batman is also just shown to be, as I said before, while he's physically capable, he's also intellectually capable too, you know, in the way in which Batman's able to like solve Riddler's riddles, mind you, a little bit too easily, but he, you know, it shows that he's very, very smart, especially in like the Riddler hostage scene, which is probably the scene that comes to mind the most. You know how he's like very quickly able to give the answers to the DA to give to Riddler and stuff. That scene's awesome. And you know, speaking of, you know, a new take on Batman, we've seen his origin before. We've seen, you know, him in his later years before. And I feel like I'm just, like, saying the same stuff in the press tour that they've said about this movie. But it's true. Like, I do agree with all these things they're saying. And that's why I do appreciate this movie a lot more. And so, yeah, we've seen all these, like, different, you know, versions of Batman. But we've never seen him in, like, the early years. You know, we've seen him when he's just starting out. And we've seen him when we have, like, a time jump and he's in his later years. But not in, like, that early period where it's, like, he is Batman already. Everyone knows who he is. But he's not, like, the Batman. Does that make sense? Like, he's only really known as Vengeance for the first half of this movie. And we're still seeing him grow, like that scene where, you know, he jumps off the building and he's, like, hits himself, which obviously he probably should have died, or at least had a concussion then. But anyways, you know, plot convenience. But so, yeah, we see that he's still learning, he's still at room for improvement, and especially when I get to the mixed stuff, you know, he's learning to balance his Bruce persona and his Batman persona too. And he also grows a lot throughout the course of the movie, realizing that his purpose isn't just to defeat these villains and, like, spread fear, but it's also to spread hope for those that need saving, because Gotham does need saving, which is definitely something that he's learned throughout the entire movie. And I entirely disagree with Ben Shapiro in that this movie hates Batman and stuff because he missed the entire part of the movie, which is that, you know, he learns that he needs to do more, because Batman's not just criminals. I mean, like, it's definitely a major part of his character, but it's not the only part of his character. And they never really showed him saving citizens in this movie until later on in the movie when he realizes the impact that he has on these kids that he's saving, you know, through the floods. I love that we skipped the origin entirely because, you know, the audience should know it by now, and the amount of times we've seen the alley scene and them being shot and stuff. Although we do get some references to this origin, like we see Mayor Mitchell's kid, and like Batman stops and looks at him in the funeral and stuff and saves him, and it reminds him of when his parents were murdered and now he's going to be an orphan and stuff. And that scene, when I first watched it, was incredibly impactful for me, and I was like, damn, bro, this guy's been through everything and now he's seeing someone that looks like him. Like, just imagine how you would feel in that scene. Like, jeez. And as I said before, the different gadgets that Batman uses, and obviously, like I said, you know, the batarang on his chest, but also, like, the eye device that he uses, which is so cool and creative. We haven't seen that before, I don't think, where he's able to, like, record and go back and rewatch stuff that he, you know, filmed using that eye device, and then he gives it to Selina and stuff, which is so cool. And there's also some very different ways in which, you know, they've told the events from Bruce's perspective, like the narration in the first few minutes and the final few minutes. I very, 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 very much wish we got that throughout the entire movie. It is so cool. October 31st. I don't think I'm making a difference. They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows. I love that scene. It gave me goosebumps the first time I saw it. It is my favorite scene of the entire movie by far. I love that scene, especially when, like, even though he's not there, like, all these criminals are terrified of him because they've heard of him, and then, you know, when the light hits the sky, it's not just a call, it's a warning. Goosebumps, literal goosebumps. I love that scene. I just love how threatening he is, especially like I saw on Twitter, like when they go to investigate the murder of the mayor, and then it's like, Batman, you can't be here, and he doesn't say anything. He just gives that cop the death stare, and he's like, do you know who I am? He doesn't say that, but like that's what he's saying through his presence, and his presence in this movie, Batman's presence, is phenomenal. He's scary, but he's also hopeful towards the end of the movie too. This is the definitive version of Batman in terms of how the public receives him, if that makes sense. I also love Christian Bale's Bruce, but I think his Batman can be kind of cheesy at times because he goes, where are they? I'm Batman! It's kind of... I'm Batman. I know that it's going to be clipped out of this video. It's going to go all over my server. Anyways. But by far, the aspect of the movie I love the most, I love Batman as I said, but the aspect I love the most is Riddler. Riddler in this movie is amazing. He's terrifying. He's shown to be a psychotic serial killer, but then he's also got this like YouTuber personality, which is hilarious. Thanks guys for all the comments. Thanks for the tips on the detonators. That was hilarious. I was dying in that scene. And Paul Dano, oh my god, he's incredible. Apparently he was amazing in There Will Be Blood, and he's just as good in this movie. Riddler has just such an incredibly motivated and laid plan. I talked about before the corruption and stuff, but his whole goal is exposing this, but then it's also related back to his backstory and stuff. Especially if like you read the prequel novel and stuff and you realize that Bruce, you know, he's an orphan, right? However, he's also a billionaire and everyone's focusing on him, but not the actual people that, like, as he described, like, people have to sleep, like, 12 people in a room and, like, the babies get killed and stuff, or they, you know, die because they aren't looked after properly and stuff, and you know, all the media just doesn't care about these orphans and stuff, and that is a very, very good point. And then he also obviously exposes, you know, how rich people and people in power are misusing their position for their own gain and stuff, and these are very, very topical issues, I reckon, and they're very interesting and complicated, and it really made me think, you know, I definitely think that Riddler had the right intentions. He definitely wants to expose the, you know, the corruption, which is definitely, you know, good. Obviously, you don't want corruption, but obviously, you know, the way in which he did that was by murdering them, which is obviously not the accepted method morally in our society to do. And my second favorite scene, my first favorite scene is obviously, as I said, the opening monologue and stuff. But my second favorite scene is where Batman and the Riddler, you know, face off in Arkham, and then they just give each other the death stare, and then, you know, there's not much dialogue by Batman, but you can just see that he's terrified of him, and especially was like, what have you done, and stuff, and then he's just going crazy, you know, singing Ave Maria, and yeah, Riddler believes that they're working together on this case, but then, you know, the plan failed, obviously, and Riddler's ego takes a hit, because, you know, he miscalculated, you know, he misinterpreted the situation, which just, like, never happens. Riddler is always right, and so when he realizes that Batman actually doesn't want to work with him, and doesn't want to be his partner, then he's, like, freaking out, obviously, he sings Ave Maria. That is just an awesome scene, and it just shows truly how psychopathic this version of Riddler actually is, which I loved. However, with the Riddler, after the first time I watched this movie, I was a little bit disappointed because there was never really, like, a climactic scene, like, you know, with the two of them, and there was only really one scene throughout the entire movie where the two of them were actually in the same scene, and so I was really disappointed about that and felt it was very anticlimactic. However, I heard everyone's criticisms, which were like, you know, Riddler, you know, his main strength is in his head and not in his physical abilities, and throughout the entire movie, the actual threat is, like, the clues and stuff, and that's how they communicate. And I was like, yeah, sure, but it's my personal preference for me that I just don't like that they don't, you know, talk at all throughout the movie until the very end. However, after rewatching it, I see where those people are coming from, and I definitely agree that the clues and stuff do make for a more interesting, I guess, villain slash mystery than an actual, like, physical threat. However, that excuse that he's a more intellectual person than a physical person, I don't really buy that, because if you look at The Dark Knight, Joker's not a good fighter, but the way he's able to get inside Batman's head when he's fighting, you know, definitely makes up for his lack of physical abilities. And so they could have done something like that with a Riddler. However, that wasn't a problem for me after my second viewing. I saw where they were coming from, and I also lowered my expectations, and so I knew that they wouldn't have, like, a massive fight after my second watch. So I didn't have a problem with that after my second watch. But also, like, they did spoil the scene he gets arrested in the trailer. I know a lot of people thought it was going to be like what happened in The Dark Knight when Joker hands himself in and he blows up this station and stuff and escapes, but that was basically how he was defeated. You know, it was shown in the trailer. And yeah, also the threat was more like, you know, him inspiring a movement and, you know, bringing all these, like, Riddler cosplayers to fight Batman and stuff, rather than Riddler himself. It was more like the Riddler mantle. After my first watch, I was like, oh, there's literally like no climax whatsoever. They just have a fight in the prison cell, and then there's like a fight with some minions, and then that's it. But I definitely like that scene a lot more, where like all the minions were shooting like the mayor and stuff, and then after a while, Batman's nowhere to be seen, and then he just comes down, and then amazing shot, and like the last second, ready to save the day. That scene is great, probably up there with one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And yeah, if you look at like The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, at least for me, what is annoying about those movies is that the villains are incredible, don't get me wrong, but they outshine the main protagonist in the Batman, and I was really worried going into it that the Riddler would outshine. I probably would say that he did, but not by a significant margin. I definitely think that Batman in this movie was given a lot of growth and depth, and I would say that he was definitely a worthy opponent for the standout of the movie, but Riddler probably still takes the case. And the final thing I have in this category is the humor. I saw, again, another stupid review that says something like it was like an MCU movie just without humor. I don't even think I have to explain how stupid that is. But yeah, the humor was actually very subtle in this movie. It wasn't like bang on like one-liners and stuff like in Marvel movies. However, it was some very intellectual jokes, I'd say. Like the thumb drive joke, like the Hippocratic Oath, or like when Penguin says, does no one speak Spanish and stuff. It was a bit weird. After my first viewing, I didn't like Penguin, and actually thought that joke about speaking Spanish was stupid. I actually laughed a lot in my second viewing, which just goes to show, how much my opinions of this movie changed just after one viewing alone. But yeah, Penguin was also very, very funny. And I'm curious to see how they do a spin-off with him. I don't know how that's going to work and what they could do with him. But, I mean, yeah, he was only in 7 minutes of this movie, so there is still a lot we don't know about him and stuff. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And obviously, Colin Farrell's makeup was absolutely incredible. It does not look like him whatsoever. But yeah, that's everything in this section. So let's move on to the second and final section of this video, which is the mixed stuff. Here we go. Okay, so you may notice that in this video there is a bad stuff section, which doesn't mean that this movie is perfect, but it means that there's nothing at all that I disliked about the movie, just things that I definitely would have done differently, but that doesn't mean that what we were given was bad either. So that's what the mixed stuff in this video means. It's things that I would have done differently or I would have preferred more, but that doesn't mean that I disliked what we got in the movie. I want to make that clear before I get into this section. So the first thing in this section is the underutilization of certain characters. So yeah, I would have definitely loved to have seen more, of Alfred in particular, and I would have loved to have seen more of, Robert Pattinson's range. He did get one scene and stuff, like, later on in the movie when he finds out about, Thomas Wayne and everything, but it was mostly monotonous throughout the course of the movie, and those are just two examples of some characters I feel like weren't, utilized to their full potential. Mainly Alfred. Alfred was in, literally, I could probably count it on one hand, like 4 or 5, maybe 6 scenes in the entire movie, and Andy Serkis is just so good, man, and they literally just decided just to blow him up and just keep him in a hospital for half the bloody movie. Like, man, why would you do that? I hope there's a reason why. Maybe he was like too busy with Venom 2 or something that they couldn't get him to film for a long period of time, and I'm just like, man, Alfred would have been so cool. So I guess, sort of segueing from Alfred, I understand that this version of Bruce is focusing on Batman a lot more and doesn't care about his Bruce persona. However, this is a personal preference. This emo Bruce wasn't one in particular that I cared for, especially his emo look. Look, I understand that this movie has a different approach, and I understand that by the end of the movie he realizes that he kind of has to be Bruce for the greater good and stuff. And I understand that it's only like year 2 and stuff, so he's still learning about how to balance these different personas. I entirely understand that. But that doesn't mean that when I go to see a Bruce Wayne / Batman movie, I'm not going to be disappointed when I don't really see much of Bruce Wayne. Don't get me wrong, the reason why it's in the mixed stuff and not the bad stuff is because the Batman we get is absolutely incredible. And I think that even as Bruce, Robert Pattinson was still good, but he wasn't the Bruce Wayne we know and love, if that makes sense. I obviously understand that Bruce will have more of a focus in the sequel, and he realizes that he has to embrace this side more, like donating and being more associated with Wayne Enterprises and stuff, but that doesn't mean I have to love this decision either. I'm not necessarily saying he has to be like that playboy, because I know a lot of people complain that it's a bit sexist and like outdated and stuff. I'm not saying that, just be a little more public, and I also wish that they split it into 3 different personalities. So you obviously have like public Bruce, Batman, and then Bruce with Alfred, which is his true self. And we never really saw that. It was basically all the same thing. And even when he was Batman, he didn't really change his voice at all. It was just kind of the same old whispering Bruce. Again, I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not saying that's a bad decision. I'm just saying subjectively, I would have preferred a different take on this Bruce. That's just my personal opinion, and you can disagree. The second last thing in this category, it is 3 hours, and it is quite exposition heavy. Not to say that it's like bad pacing wise, it is very, very entertaining throughout the entire movie. But it is a lot to take in, and I especially think that this second viewing, as I keep on saying, helped so much more because I realised so many different things that I missed earlier on in the movie, because it is a lot to take in at once. Which leads to my final point, which is just like the clues and the overall story, at least for me, can be difficult to follow, and a lot of the language in which is used is very difficult. I didn't know what a rat was, which is kind of stupid, or what is it? An impermanent or something? What am I trying to think of? The word that I'm thinking of will be listed down here. But yeah, that word, a lot of the things that I talked about, like the cases and all this like GCPD stuff, I didn't really understand. So it is definitely targeted for more mature, comprehensive audience than other Batman movies. But yeah, so I definitely think that was something that, I struggle with the movie to understand a lot of the clues and stuff. I don't say the movie was bad, but that's just my personal struggle with this movie, was to follow it. So yeah, that is all I have in this section. Let's just move on to my overall conclusion for this review. Here we go. In conclusion, Batman is truly cinema. Well, after my first viewing, I only really liked this movie but didn't love it. I think it is safe to say that after my second viewing, I truly do love this movie. Regardless of personal opinions, I think, objectively speaking, this movie is incredibly well made and well put together. From the technical aspects, including the incredible scoring by Michael Giacchino, again, can't pronounce your name, I'm sorry, to the direction by Matt Reeves, and the visual language and cinematography by the director of photography, Greg Fraser. Also, speaking of Greg Fraser, he's an Australian, and he was like the director of photography for like Dune and Mandalorian and stuff, so he's a legend. Good on you, Greg. To the story aspects, including the deep study of a fractured city with so much corruption and how people in power may misuse their position, etc. This movie demonstrates an entirely new take on the Caped Crusader and the world of Gotham, hence why I believe it is basically impossible to compare it to any other Batman movies that have come before it, because it is just so different. The Riddler is easily the standout for me, although I will say Batman is a strong contender. However, that being said, there were some aspects of the movie that could have been done better. However, that is not to say that what we got was bad either. I definitely reckon that some characters like Alfred were underutilized, and even though they were going on an entirely different take on Bruce, barely having him in this movie, and literally for like 2 scenes having him as Bruce in public and stuff, this is not my personal preference for how to do that character. But I did still love the take on Batman we got regardless. The movie is also quite long, however I would say it was very well paced, which significantly benefits the movie, although at times it can definitely get convoluted with all these clues and, trying to follow how they all, line up and everything. And so yeah, all that can get sort of confusing at times. But yeah, overall, I will give this movie a 9 out of 10 because the pros significantly outweigh these minor criticisms / personal preferences. I wouldn't really say it's a bad thing about this movie, it's just like what I would have done differently, as I've said already many times. You should definitely go out of your way to see this, and especially if you're a Batman fan, or especially if you're a comic movie fan, you will love this. And Matt Reeves, you are a legend. Thank you so much for this incredible movie. And I'm so excited to see where this goes in the sequel and in the rest of this trilogy. And obviously the Penguin spin-off, and like that Arkham thing, which got refurbished from like a Gotham PD show to whatever it is now. I don't even know. And I'm very, very excited for this new Reeves-verse and Catwoman show, whatever might happen soon. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this review. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the post notifications so you guys know when I next upload a video. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys did enjoy this review. I think it will be a long one when I finish editing this, but I'm definitely proud of this script, and I definitely love this movie a lot too. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys, and I will see you guys next time. My name is Jordan, and I'm out. Bye.